first control we want to focus on is the HTML control. Now this is just the standard run-of-the-mill HTML control that you've been using for years if you've been doing web development. Now these are useful. Understand, there are places and purposes to use all of these, and for standard HTML, these are great for client-side utilization only. There are no extras here though. When you use a standard HTML control, it's just going to be rendered in the client-side browser. Any programming functionality that you give it will have to be through script, and it will only behave on the client side and so forth. Also, you'll have to utilize VBScript or JavaScript to get functionality out of these things on the client side. This really hasn't changed from DHTML and the kind of things we did a little bit earlier and before. Now, keep in mind when we put a standard HTML control on an ASP.NET page, this kind of goes through the wash with ASP. They get compiled, but they get rendered back to the browser in the stream of code that comes back, and they show back up as standard HTML controls. So what I want to do now, there's not a whole lot to say about HTML controls, the standard ones. I want to go out to Visual Studio and show you how you can find these things in the Visual Studio environment. So let's go out and open Visual Studio. And I want to show you an example of this. And I'm going to use the ASP.NET video. I've gone in and added a little code to this to show you what's going on. Notice we've got two buttons now. One says button and one says client. And I want to show you on the HTML what it did. Well, first of all, let's talk about the different controls. Notice that the controls that I mentioned in the previous video, here are the web forms. And if I drag these on, these are the Microsoft Web Form server controls. Now, if I want the old standard HTML, if I click on the HTML button over here in the toolbox, these things will fly up, and you see all of these. Now, you'll notice this little arrow down here. It looks like it goes with clipboard ring, but it actually allows me to go down through these controls, and you'll see it here as well at the top. To show you what's going on, let's go look at some HTML here. And you'll notice it's fairly straightforward. I've got some things commented out there. But if I go in and add, for example, a checkbox, better yet, a text field, you'll notice when I add this, I'll have to go find it in HTML and see where it put it. But notice that it shows up as right here as a standard input. And notice the type is text and the size is 25. So this is a standard input. Now, just by dropping this on here, this is going to be a client-side control rendered by the browser and handled there. And I've got an example here, and this is one of the main reasons we might want to use these HTML controls, is for client-side functionality. So let's go look at the HTML, and I want you to notice what I did. I put on here a button for the client, so that when I run this, I've got functionality. Let me find this thing. I believe it's this right here. Notice input, and notice, yes, the type is a button, the value is client, and the name is client. And then I went up here into some client-side script, and I'm going to highlight this. Notice this is client-side script tab, tags, and notice I said script language equal VBScript, and then I created a public sub, and notice public sub clicked, and then a message box happens. It says this was handled by the client's browser, and then I end my sub. And if I go back down here to my control, you'll notice that I put an event handler in here. On click, I want to call clicked. Okay, and so then I told myself up here in the script tags, here's clicked. And when that gets clicked down there, then this runs. And this is the same old DHTML stuff you've been doing for a while if you're used to that. If not, this is how you do it. So let's run this, and I want to show you that by using these controls, standard HTML controls, I can get client-side capabilities. Now, remember this one from a previous one. If I click that, notice it says this was clicked and handled at the server. This is one of the server controls. The client side, notice it created a message box and it was handled by the client's browser. Now, one thing you will notice, these go a lot faster. Notice when I click button, you'll notice right down here at the bottom of the page, you can see that it's making a request back to the web server, and you see it pane across. Notice. Now on the client, notice it's just instantly there. And so that's one of the advantages we'll talk about later. So that's what these are going to give you. Okay? Now there's another thing that we'll look at a little bit later that compares these to some of Microsoft's new controls. The main thing to remember is that these are going to give you client-side functionality. They're very familiar. We've been using them for a while.